name's Libby Hill, and I want to talk today about auditory memory. What is it? Why is it important? Why do we need to know about it? Now, we learn a lot of what we know about language processing by looking at what happens when things go wrong. And this is the same when we're looking at auditory memory. We know that there's different types of memory because if we look at somebody with Alzheimer's, we see that they remember what they did in the war, so their long-term memory is intact, but they can't remember what they had for breakfast, so there must be a short-term memory store as well. And this is another memory store. It's auditory memory, so you have to listen. It's a memory you need to remember a phone number in order to dial it. So when someone rings my house and they say, "Could you just take this number down, please?" Of course I say yes. And then I look around and there's no pen by the phone. I put plenty of pens by the phone, but there never is one when I need one. So I have to remember that number in my head while I rush to the kitchen, open the tap drawer. I'm hoping everybody has one of those, by the way. I take out the stubby crayon that's nearly always there and I write the number down. Don't need to remember it anymore. It's a short-term memory. Now, many of your children will have a really good long-term memory. They may be able to remember places they've been, people they've seen, things they've done before, but that doesn't mean that their auditory memory will be good. And what we find is that most children with language processing difficulties have this as a fundamental issue. So if we look to the technical definition, it's the ability to process information presented orally, to analyse it mentally and store it to be recalled. Someone who's written quite a lot about auditory memory is Susan Gathercole, and she refers to auditory memory as being like a post-it note on which we rapidly jot down important information before we lose it. Working memory involves visual memory too. We're just looking at the auditory side of it. Typical auditory memory: 2 items at 2, 3 at 3, 4 at 4, and 4 in the correct order for school. So what are the implications? Well, children with weak auditory memory skills have difficulty understanding language. It's related to the age equivalent, so that if you're 6 in school, but you've only got an auditory memory of 2, you're really only going to be able to understand the same as a 2-year-old. I had an extreme case of that where I had a 15-year-old who only had 2 items of auditory memory, and he had absolutely terrible behaviour difficulties. But you could see why. He just wasn't understanding what was said to him. Now, most children learn to read by being read to. And so those with problems with auditory learning will likely take longer to learn to read. And you may find, unless something's done about their memory, that these delays will be reflected later in life with poor reading and writing skills. When children start school, they really need to be able to recall 4 things in the correct order for the reception classroom. Now, why is it getting worse these days? Well, we live in such a visually bombarding world. And what happens is the child is actually under constant low-level stress. So all these things that are in the modern world, the overscheduling, always on the media, exposure to bright, colourful images, and possibly even violent images, this affects the child's retention and learning because the hippocampus, that's the part of the brain that stores short-term memory, hasn't got the necessary downtime. It needs that downtime to reformat information into usable information. So the modern world is what's causing this. Now, deep inside the medial temporal lobe is the region of the brain known as the limbic system. And this includes lots of various organs that are relative and of relevance to processing memory. So as you can see from this diagram, it's right in the heart of the temporal lobe, and the hippocampus is the most important part for auditory memory. So what can we do? Well, there will be a how-to video that Natasha's putting together on how to actually work on auditory memory, but we need to look at strategies. So always ensure that you have the child's full attention before giving instructions in order to maximise their chances of being able to do it. Break down or chunk information into manageable bits. So if you had 4 digits for them to remember, 9714, chunk it, 9714. Use sign or natural gesture to support what you're saying, so they can use their visual memory and the visual system to help. And encourage them to use rehearsal. So if I'm doing a group and I'll take my turn and they've just asked me to get the cup, the spoon and the brick, then I will say, okay, right, cup, spoon, brick, cup, spoon, brick. And I show them how, if they repeat it, they're rehearsing it, and then I can be successful. Encourage visualization, get them to picture it in their mind. If you actually look at how somebody professionally develops memory, it's by visualizing. So if they're given a whole list of objects to remember, they will visualize them. So encourage the child to think about it. The visualization uses the right hand side of the brain, so you're getting the right hand and the left hand to work together. You also need to tell them that it's okay to say when they haven't understood, or they can't remember, or they've become overloaded by what's been said. All memory and sequencing tasks can be made harder by increasing the number of objects or pictures to recall. So start with 2, then 3, then 4. And also increasing the number of objects or pictures to choose from. So you might start with 4, move to 6 and have 8. Also, if you ask them to remember the last things in order, then that makes it easier too. If you actually use a random order, that makes it much harder. Try and introduce a delay before the child has to respond. So it could be that they move to a different table to go and fetch the things, so they've got to hold it into their head for longer. Introduce a distracting task before allowing the child to respond. You could increase the complexity of the verbal instruction. So 1 part, 2 part, 3, etc. Put a time limit on the activity. Increase the level of background noise. If you have a look for Natasha's handout and also the how-to information that we've put together. Now, if you have a look here, this is just a posting activity, posting the picture through a posting box. So the aim is to promote auditory memory, but it's working on all these other things: attention and listening, understanding language, developing expressive language, because they're asking you as well, taking a turn. They're remembering, and they're using their social skills. So you can see how a really simple activity is actually working on many, many parts of language, and certainly will be promoting their auditory memory. So thank you for listening. Please post any questions that you have or comments on the Facebook page so that we can answer them for you. And we'd also like to hear about your experiences with having a child with auditory memory difficulties. Thank you.